You've talked about how you use lucid dreaming to think, to come up with ideas as a source of creativity. Could you maybe talk through that? Maybe the process of how to, you've invented a lot of things. You've came up and thought through some very interesting ideas. What advice would you give, or can you speak to the process of thinking, of how to think creatively?
Well, I mean, sometimes I will think through in a dream and try to interpret that. But I think the key issue that I would tell younger people um, is to put yourself in the position that what you're trying to create already exists. And then you're explaining, like,
How it works.
exactly.
That's really interesting. You paint a world that you would like to exist, you think it exists, and reverse engineer
And then
that.
you actually imagine you're giving a speech about
Yeah,
how you created this. Well, you'd have to then work backwards as to how you would create it in order to make it work.
that's brilliant. And that requires some imagination too, some first principles thinking. You have to visualize that world. That's really interesting.
And generally, when I would talk about things we're trying to invent, I would use the present tense as if it already exists. Not just to give myself that confidence, but everybody else who's working on it. We just have to kind of do all the steps in order to make it
How much,
actual.
how much of a good idea is about timing? How much is it about your genius versus that its time has come?
Timing's very important. I mean, that's really why I got into futurism. I wasn't inherently a futurist. That was not really my goal. It's really to figure out when things are feasible. We see that now with large scale models. The very large scale models like GPT-3, it started 2 years ago. 4 years ago, it wasn't feasible. In fact, they did create GPT-2, which didn't work. So it required a certain amount of timing having to do with this exponential growth of computing power.
So futurism in some sense is a study of timing, trying to understand how the world will evolve.
Yeah.
And when will the capacity for certain ideas
and that's become
emerge.
A thing in itself, then, to try to time things in the future. But really, its original purpose was to time my products. I mean, I did OCR in the 1970s because OCR doesn't require a lot of computation.
Optical character recognition.
Yeah, so we were able to do that in the 70s. And I waited till the 80s to address speech recognition, since that requires more computation.
So you were thinking through timing when you were developing those things.
Yeah.
Has its time come?
Yeah.
And that's how you've developed that brain power to start to think in a futurist sense. How will the world look like in 2045 and work backwards?
Yeah.
And how it gets there.
But that has become a thing in itself, because looking at what things will be like in the future reflects such dramatic changes in how humans will live. That was worth communicating also.
So you developed that muscle of predicting the future and then apply it broadly and start to discuss how it changes the world of technology, how it changes the world of human life on Earth. In Danielle, one of your books, you write about someone who has the courage to question assumptions that limit human imagination to solve problems. And you also give advice on how each of us can have this kind of courage.
Well, it's good that you picked that quote, because I think that does symbolize what Danielle is about.
Courage. So how can each of us have that courage to question assumptions?
I mean, we see that when people can go beyond the current realm and create something that's new. I mean, take Uber, for example. Before that existed, you never thought that that would be feasible. And it did require changes in the way people work.
Is there practical advices you give in the book about what each of us can do to be a Danielle?
Well, she looks at the situation and tries to imagine how she can overcome various obstacles, and then she goes for it. And she's a very good communicator, so she can communicate these ideas to other people.
And there's practical advice of learning to program and recording your life and things of this nature. Become a physicist. So you list a bunch of different suggestions of how to throw yourself into this world.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a idea how young people can actually change the world by learning all of these different skills.
And at the core of that is the belief that you can change the world. That your mind, your body can change the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And not letting anyone else tell you otherwise.
That's very good. Exactly.